I spent years wanting nice things. When I finally got them, I became almost too afraid to enjoy them. Today, I want to talk about what that fear revealed. Hi, I'm Leslie. Welcome to Coffee with Leslie. Subscribe if you enjoy honest conversations about what life feels like after the dream finally comes true. For most of my life, owning something genuinely nice felt like a distant possibility. I was familiar with making things last. Replacing something was rarely a casual decision, so I learned to pay attention to what we had and protect it very carefully. That history shaped the way I imagined success. I believed the day I could finally afford a good home or dependable vehicle would feel like relief. The worry would ease once I had reached a place where life felt more secure. When some of those dreams eventually came true, the relief arrived in the form I did not expect. Instead of relaxing around the things I had wanted, I became their nervous caretaker. Owning them gave me something valuable to enjoy, but it also gave me something valuable to lose. I first noticed this after we bought our home. Homeownership had represented security to me for years. I imagined closing the door behind us and knowing the place was finally ours. There would be no landlord making decisions about the space. We could settle without wondering whether somebody else might eventually change the terms. From a distance, the dream had looked peaceful. The reality felt wonderful at the beginning because I was proud that we had reached something once so far away. Then I began listening to the house. I can walk through the house noticing the furnace cycle, the hot water tank, a slow drain, a refrigerator's changing hum as though the building is quietly handing me a list of future expenses. Out here, the wind can become incredibly strong. When it rises, I do not simply hear weather outside. Part of me imagines what the gusts might be doing to the house until my thoughts eventually reach the roof. The home I expected to make me feel safe had become something I was constantly trying to keep safe. That reversal caught me completely off guard. Nothing needed to be wrong for me to begin anticipating the expense of fixing it. Ownership had made every system personal. A failure would arrive with a decision, a repair bill, and the knowledge that nobody else was responsible for handling it. The house remained our achievement, although my attention could turn it into a collection of future emergencies held together by walls. I could walk through a comfortable room and still notice the possibility of something going wrong. This was never the calm I had pictured. I had believed owning the house would remove uncertainty from my life. In reality, it moved uncertainty into the place I loved. That may be why it felt so intense. The home represented all the years when buying one felt so impossible. A problem with the house could therefore feel much larger than the problem itself. A repair threatened the stability the house was supposed to prove we had finally reached. I began to understand that protecting the building had become a way of protecting the distance between my current life and the years when this life felt out of reach. That same instinct followed me into yet another dream. Years ago, a friend picked me up so we could go for lunch. She was driving an SUV that felt wonderful from the moment I climbed inside. It was comfortable, solid, and far nicer than anything I could picture buying for myself at the time. When I got out, I remember thinking to myself what I would do to have one of those for myself. The vehicle stayed in my mind because it represented the kind of ease I had rarely experienced. It seemed like the sort of thing a person bought after life had become stable enough to choose quality, instead of simply choosing whatever was possible. A few years ago, I made that dream real. I now own the vehicle I once admired from the passenger seat. Although it is comfortable, capable, and built to be driven, I operate it as though the entire vehicle should have arrived wrapped in protective bubble wrap. An unusual sound gets my immediate attention. A small hesitation can send me directly to the dealership, where I am fairly certain somebody sees me arrive and thinks, "Oh, she's back." I can laugh about how excessive that looks, even though the concern feels completely reasonable while I am inside it. Careful maintenance is responsible. My difficulty begins when responsibility becomes a constant search for evidence that something expensive is about to fail. After wanting this vehicle for years, I now sometimes treat every kilometer as though driving it might use up the very thing I worked so hard to own. The vehicle was designed to take me places. Part of me still wants to preserve the condition it had before it became part of my actual life. The first ordinary mark can carry surprising emotional weight when replacing something once seemed impossible. Preserving what I have still feels connected to survival. My circumstances changed faster than my instincts. Learned to trust that change. The vehicle in my driveway is the evidence that I can now own something I once considered unreachable. That may be why a strange sound feels so personal. It threatens the story that I finally made it to a place where I could have something dependable and good. The object becomes tied to the achievement until protecting it feels like protecting the proof that my life really changed. I see another version of this when I travel. A vacation is supposed to create a break from ordinary pressure. I can arrive somewhere wonderful and immediately begin measuring whether I am using the experience properly. The trip cost money, required planning, and will end sooner than I want it to. That knowledge makes every hour feel unusually important. Instead of letting the day unfold, I can become preoccupied with getting the most from every moment. I may be standing somewhere beautiful while part of my mind calculates whether we have done enough with the day. Rest becomes another task to complete efficiently. So, a quiet hour can feel wasted even when quiet was part of what I wanted. I return home with wonderful memories, but I also recognize how much effort I spent trying to guarantee that the vacation would justify itself. There is something almost comical about working so hard to relax that relaxation becomes difficult. The trip becomes precious before it even begins, and precious things seem to awaken my need to manage them perfectly. That belief comes from a practical place. For much of my life, opportunities like that were limited. When a good experience could not be repeated easily, making the wrong choice during it felt expensive. I learned to squeeze value from what I had. That skill helped during years when there was little room for waste. It becomes less helpful when every enjoyable experience starts feeling like a resource I might accidentally misuse. I have wondered whether this is what people mean when they talk about scarcity mindset. I am cautious with that phrase because it can make years of practical adaptation sound like a character flaw. There were times when being careful was necessary. Watching what we spent and protecting what we owned helped us manage situations where replacement was not realistic. The habits served a real purpose, but habits built during difficult years do not automatically retire when life becomes easier. They keep reporting for work. My circumstances can say that I am allowed to enjoy something now, while an older part of me still warns that it could disappear at any moment. That conflict explains the fear more clearly than any individual purchase ever could. I still experience many good things as exceptions. An ordinary object can be used without ceremony, while a dream object feels as though it must be preserved, because I am never fully certain another one will come. That belief turns ownership into guardianship. I stop noticing how the thing can serve my life and begin concentrating on how my life might damage the thing. At that point, the relationship had quietly turned backwards. I am still learning to recognize the moment when care crosses into fear. Care has a practical purpose, but fear keeps supervising long after the useful action has ended. It can sound exactly like responsibility, which is why I trusted it for so long. I believed vigilance was the price of keeping the life I had worked for. Sometimes vigilance was simply taking my attention away from that life. There is an irony in spending years wanting something and then refusing to relax once it arrives. The dream becomes a responsibility almost immediately, and my focus on making it last prevents it from ever feeling ordinary. Ordinary once sounded like the opposite of special. I now think it may be where enjoyment finally becomes possible. Something has settled into your life when you can use it without turning each interaction into a ceremony of protection. That is the ease I had actually been imagining. The object itself could never provide it. Money can complete a purchase without teaching a person how to feel safe after the purchase is complete. The outside of life can change long before the inner expectations do. I can hold the keys and still feel like someone who might lose access to stability. The past does not vanish when circumstances improve and often comes along to supervise. I had also assumed that buying something better would automatically update the way I saw myself. The change never happened that cleanly. The purchase changed what I owned long before it changed what felt normal to me. The person driving the dream vehicle still remembers years when unexpected repair could disrupt everything. The homeowner walking through these rooms still carries the instinct to calculate how long something might last before it needs replacing. That older awareness does not disappear when the paperwork is signed. It can make a good thing feel slightly above the life I am accustomed to, even when I earned it and paid for it. Sometimes I respond by trying to become the perfect owner. I maintain everything carefully and feel responsible for keeping it close to the condition in which I received it. Perfection becomes an emotional fee I keep paying for the privilege of having something nice. Recognizing that unsettled me. I had already earned the right to own it, yet I was behaving as though the right to use it still required daily proof. I do not resent that cautious part of myself. Years with little room for error taught me to pay attention and reach for control whenever something valuable felt vulnerable. I am beginning to see that I may not need to manage every good thing that enters my life. Enjoyment seems to require a form of trust I have not practiced very often. The trust is never that nothing will break. Everything used in real life eventually changes. The trust is that a problem will remain a problem instead of becoming proof that every difficult year is returning. The difference becomes enormous when a repair can remain an inconvenience instead of feeling like evidence that stability is collapsing. These thoughts sound simple when spoken aloud, although living them feels much more demanding. Scarcity taught me to look ahead for the loss, while enjoyment asks me to remain with what is here. That may be why pleasure can feel surprisingly vulnerable. Worry creates the impression that I am preparing for the future, while enjoyment requires me to stop rehearsing the ending long enough to experience the middle. I spent years imagining the day I would finally have the nice thing without realizing that ownership would ask me to believe I was allowed to use it. Owning something may be a financial fact, but feeling comfortable enough to live with it naturally is an emotional adjustment. I can sign the papers, receive the keys, and still need time before the thing feels safely mine. Perhaps that is why I guarded these dreams so fiercely. They felt borrowed even after they belonged to me, leaving part of me alert for the moment when the arrangement would be exposed as temporary. That anticipation reduced the very pleasure I was trying to protect. I can see now that I sometimes confuse appreciation with anxiety. Worrying feels like proof that I understand the value of what I have, even though real appreciation may be much quieter. I may simply be allowing a good thing to do the job I wanted it to do. I am not presenting that as a solution. It is simply the realization I am currently living inside. The dreams came true without teaching me how to inhabit them. That part never appeared in the fantasy. Reality added responsibility to every dream, while my old habits added enough fear to make enjoyment far more complicated than I expected. I am beginning to understand that a good thing finds its purpose when it becomes part of a life. Use changes things while giving them meaning. Preservation can keep an object looking neat without creating a life around it. That realization feels almost embarrassingly late. I worked hard to reach a point where I could have more, but I never considered that I might also need to learn how to be less afraid of what I had. The fear does not mean I am ungrateful. It shows that I remember what loss felt like when recovery would have been difficult. I can respect that history without allowing it to make every good thing feel fragile. At least that is what I am beginning to understand. Signs of use may simply mean that I finally allowed the dream to become real. A perfectly preserved life would have very little living inside it. Rather than spending the next year standing guard over the things I once wanted, I want to be present enough to notice that I already have them. What I had been dreaming about was the life those things seemed capable of making possible. That life cannot fully begin while every sign of use feels like a threat. I remain careful while questioning whether fear deserves to be the caretaker of everything I value. After years of learning how to hold on, this season may be showing me what it feels like to loosen my grip without losing what matters. I finally own some of the nice things I once imagined from a distance. The unexpected work is learning that enjoying them does not disrespect how hard they were to reach. Enjoyment may be the reason I worked so hard in the first place. This is Coffee with Lesli. Thank you so much for sharing this conversation with me. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.